The courtroom went silent the moment he walked in. Not because of the black robe, not because of the gavel in his hand, but because the man sitting in the defendant's chair, gray-haired, shackled at the wrists, 22 years older than the last time they'd seen each other, looked up at the judge's bench and recognized his son. Marcus Elijah Webb, federal judge, Southern District of Georgia, 39 years old. The same boy who had been ripped from his father's arms in a courthouse hallway in 2002, screaming, kicking, begging a social worker to let go, was now the most powerful person in this room. His father's name was Calvin Webb, and he had been in prison for a crime he did not commit. For 22 years, Calvin Webb had filed appeals. For 22 years, every appeal had been denied. Now, the last appeal had landed on his son's desk. What Marcus did next would either save his father or prove, once and for all, that justice in America was blind in all the wrong ways. But before we get to that courtroom, we need to go back, way back, to 2002, to a small city in Georgia, to a 9-year-old boy who had just lost everything. Macon, Georgia, 2002. Marcus Webb was 9 years old and the happiest kid on his street. Not because they had money, they didn't. Not because the apartment was nice, it wasn't. But because every evening, Calvin Webb came home from his shift at the packaging plant, smelling like motor oil and sweat, and the first thing he did, every single time, was find Marcus. "There's my man," Calvin would say, and lift the boy off the ground like he weighed nothing. They lived on the 3rd floor of a tan brick building on Hazel Street. 2 bedrooms, 1 bathroom, a kitchen window that faced a parking lot. Marcus's mother, Diana, had left when he was 4. No forwarding address, no explanation. Just gone one morning like a season changing. It was just the 2 of them. Calvin worked doubles when he could. Packed Marcus's lunch every night before bed so he wouldn't have to rush in the morning. Helped with homework at the kitchen table, even when he didn't understand the questions himself. He'd read the textbook alongside Marcus, both of them figuring it out together. "We learn it together," Calvin used to say. That way, we're both smarter by morning. Their neighbor, Miss Loretta Fields, was 68, moved slow, and kept Marcus after school until Calvin got home. She'd known Calvin since he was a boy himself. Called him one of the good ones, and she didn't say that lightly. Marcus loved 2 things: books and his father. Not in that order. He was a reader in the way some kids are just born readers. The kind who finished library books in a day, who kept a flashlight under the pillow, who read cereal boxes at breakfast because his eyes needed something to do. His teacher, Mrs. Patel, pulled Calvin aside in October of that year. "Mr. Webb," she said, "your son is one of the brightest students I've taught in 15 years. I want to nominate him for the district's Advanced Scholars Program." Calvin stood in that hallway and cried, quietly, trying to hide it. Marcus saw anyway. "Why are you crying, Dad?" "Because I'm proud, son. A man's allowed to cry when he's proud." 3 weeks later, Everything ended. November 14th, 2002. Marcus was at school when it happened. 3 miles away, in a parking lot behind a check-cashing store on Riverside Drive, a man named Gerald Pruitt was robbed at gunpoint. His wallet, $340 in cash, and a gold watch his father had given him. Gerald Pruitt was white. The detective who caught the case was Detective Ray Colson. 14 years on the force. 14 years of closed cases and a reputation for working fast. Too fast. A witness, a woman named Sheila Marks, told Colson she'd seen a black man in a blue jacket leaving the parking lot around the time of the robbery. Medium height, 30s. Calvin Webb was black. Calvin Webb was in his 30s. Calvin Webb had walked past that parking lot that evening on his way home from work. He was wearing a navy blue jacket. Detective Colson brought Calvin in for questioning. Calvin told the truth. He'd been walking home. He'd passed the lot. He hadn't seen anything. Colson didn't believe him, or didn't want to. The lineup was shown to Sheila Marks 3 days later. By then, she'd already seen Calvin's face on a flyer Colson's partner had circulated in the neighborhood. She picked him. Calvin was charged with armed robbery. The public defender assigned to his case was handling 61 other cases that month. He met Calvin twice before trial. The trial lasted 2 days. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Guilty. 12 to 15 years. Marcus was sitting in a classroom learning about fractions when his father was led away in handcuffs. Miss Loretta got the call first. She sat Marcus down on her floral couch and held his hands. "Baby," she said softly, "something happened to your dad." Marcus didn't cry. Not then. He went very, very still. "Is he coming back?" Miss Loretta's eyes filled. "I pray to God he is, baby. I pray every day." The state placed Marcus in foster care the following week. He was 9 years old. He had a father who loved him, and the system was about to make sure he couldn't reach either one. The first foster home lasted 4 months. The Graysons were decent people who already had 3 kids in a house that was too small and a patience that ran out. When Marcus stopped eating and started staring at walls, they called the county and said they weren't equipped. They weren't wrong. They just weren't enough. The second home was harder. A man named Philip Durst, who smelled like beer by 6 o'clock and had rules that changed depending on his mood. Marcus learned fast to stay quiet, stay small, stay out of the way. He stayed 9 months. It felt like 9 years. The third home was different. Angela and Robert Haynes, mid-40s, a small house in a quiet neighborhood outside Augusta. No children of their own. They'd been foster parents for 11 years, 43 placements. Angela Haynes had the kind of quiet that wasn't emptiness, it was depth. She didn't talk at Marcus or around him. She talked to him, the way his father used to. The first night, she put a plate of food in front of him. Roast chicken, rice, collard greens, and sat across the table and asked him one question. "What do you want to be when you grow up?" Marcus looked at her. No one had asked him that in over a year. "A lawyer," he said. It was the first time he'd said it out loud. He wasn't even sure where it came from, except he knew. He'd been thinking about it since the day the public defender had walked out of that courthouse without looking back. "Then that's what you'll be," Angela said simply, and went back to her food. Marcus wrote to his father every week. For the first 2 years, Calvin wrote back. Letters that were careful and measured. He never told Marcus how hard it was, never described the prison, never let the boy see the weight of it. He wrote about books Marcus should read, about questions Marcus should ask his teachers, about the kind of man he hoped Marcus would become. "The world will try to make you angry," Calvin wrote in one letter, in handwriting Marcus kept and reread until the paper went soft. "Stay curious instead. Anger closes doors. Curiosity opens them." Marcus stayed curious. He devoured every book Angela brought home. History, law, biography, science. He had a particular hunger for legal history, civil rights cases, wrongful convictions, the architecture of justice and its failures. He read about the Innocence Project at 13. He read about Brady violations at 14. He understood, in a way most adults never would, what had happened to his father. When Marcus was 15, Angela drove him to the Augusta courthouse on a Saturday morning. "I want you to see something," she said. A judge named Elaine Dorsey was presiding over juvenile hearings that day. Angela knew her from church. Judge Dorsey had agreed to let Marcus sit in the gallery and observe. Marcus watched for 4 hours. He watched a 14-year-old boy get sentenced for stealing a cell phone. He watched a mother cry in the back row, trying to hold herself together. He watched the lawyers, how they stood, how they spoke, how they framed the world with words. And he felt something click into place so deep in his chest, he almost heard it. Afterward, Judge Dorsey found him in the hallway. "Angela tells me you want to be a lawyer." "I want to be a judge," Marcus corrected. He hadn't known it until he said it. Elaine Dorsey studied him for a long moment. "Come back next Saturday," she said, "and bring a notebook." For 2 years, Marcus spent every Saturday at the courthouse, reading case files Judge Dorsey flagged for him, understanding procedure, evidence, precedent, writing summaries, asking questions she made him answer himself first. She never lectured. She asked, "What do you see in this motion? Where is the weakness in this argument? If you were defending this man, what would you do differently?" Marcus got a full scholarship to Morehouse at 17, law school at the University of Georgia, law review, moot court champion, clerked for a federal judge. Every step was deliberate. Every step was moving toward the same thing. He visited his father twice a year. Calvin had been denied parole 3 times. The original witness, Sheila Marks, had died in 2011. Detective Colson had retired to Florida. The case had gone cold. No one was looking at it anymore, except Marcus. In 2019, Marcus Elijah Webb was appointed to the federal bench by a president who barely remembered signing his nomination. He was 36 years old, the youngest federal judge in the Southern District of Georgia, and the only one who had grown up in foster care. He did not tell anyone about his father. Not yet. He spent 3 years on the bench before the file landed on his desk. Webb versus State of Georgia. Appeal number 2022-CR-04471. Petition for post-conviction relief based on newly discovered evidence. His father had found something. A law student at Georgia State, 23 years old, working a clinic case she almost dropped because the file was so old, had pulled the original trial records and found something buried in the detective's notes. A second witness. A man named Terrence Gold had also been in that parking lot the night of the robbery. He had given a statement to a different officer, not Colson, describing the perpetrator as short, light-skinned, with a visible tattoo on his neck. Calvin Webb was 5'11", dark-skinned, and had no tattoos. Terrence Gold's statement had never been entered into evidence. It had never been shown to the defense. It had been filed in a miscellaneous folder, labeled incorrectly, and buried under 20 years of closed cases. This was a Brady violation. The prosecution had withheld evidence that could have changed everything. The law student's name was Priya Nair. She called the case the most important thing she'd ever worked on. She had no idea the judge assigned to the appeal was the defendant's son. When Marcus opened the file and saw his father's name, he sat at his desk for a long time. He could recuse himself. He should recuse himself. The ethical path was clear. But Marcus had spent 30 years watching ethical paths lead to the same place. Another black man, another closed door, another year gone. He called the court administrator. "I need this case reviewed by an independent panel before I make any rulings," he said. "And I need it documented that I have a personal connection to the defendant. Pull the file. Let the chips fall." He recused himself. He disclosed everything. And then he did something no one expected. He requested to appear as a witness for the defense. March 4th, 2024. The courtroom was standing room only. 3 news cameras, 2 civil rights attorneys seated beside Priya Nair, a prosecutor from the state AG's office who had been handed this case 2 weeks ago and looked like he wished he hadn't been. And in the defendant's chair, Calvin Webb, 64 years old, white hair at his temples, hands that trembled slightly, eyes that had not seen the outside world since 2002. He had not seen his son since the morning they were separated in the courthouse hallway. The independent panel of 3 judges presided. When Marcus walked to the witness stand, the room fell quiet. He wore no robe. He was not the judge today. He was just a man, a son, a witness. The defense attorney asked the first question. "Mr. Webb, can you describe your relationship to the defendant?" Marcus looked at his father. Calvin's hands had stopped trembling. He was leaning forward in his chair, jaw tight, eyes wet, and he was staring at the man his boy had become with an expression that had no word in the English language. "He is my father," Marcus said. "He raised me alone. He worked doubles so I could eat. He wrote me letters every week from prison when I was 10 years old, telling me to stay curious, telling me to stay kind, telling me not to let what happened to him make me bitter." He paused. I am a federal judge because of those letters. I am who I am because of that man. And for 22 years, the state of Georgia has kept him from the world for something he did not do. The room was silent. I am here to tell you who Calvin Webb is. The evidence will tell you what the state withheld. The panel deliberated for 6 hours. Marcus sat in a hallway outside with Angela Haynes, who was 76 now and had driven 4 hours that morning without being asked. They didn't speak much. She held his hand. At 4:47 p.m., the lead judge returned to the bench. In the matter of Calvin Webb, having reviewed the newly submitted evidence and having determined that the prosecution's failure to disclose the testimony of Terrence Gold constitutes a clear Brady violation that materially affected the outcome of the original trial, this court vacates the conviction. All charges are dismissed. Mr. Webb is to be released immediately. The room erupted. Marcus bent forward in his seat and pressed his face into his hands. Angela put her arm around him and held on. 30 seconds later, the bailiff opened the side door. Calvin Webb walked through it. He was wearing a gray shirt and borrowed shoes that were slightly too big. He blinked in the fluorescent light, slow, like a man stepping out of a dark room into a morning he had not believed was coming. He found Marcus in the crowd, and Marcus, federal judge, moot court champion, the man who had kept himself together through foster homes and law school and 2 decades of controlled grief, could not hold it anymore. He walked toward his father, and they met in the middle of the room and held each other in the way that only people who have been kept apart by force can hold each other. Not gentle, desperate, real. "I'm sorry it took so long," Marcus whispered. Calvin shook his head against his son's shoulder. "You came," he said. "That's all that matters. You came." 1 year later, Calvin Webb sat on a porch in Augusta, Georgia, in the same kind of rocking chair he'd dreamed about for 22 years. Morning light, coffee, a newspaper folded in his lap he hadn't opened yet because he was too busy watching a cardinal on the fence. He had time now. He was learning to use it. Marcus had bought the house. Modest, single-story, a garden in the back that Calvin had already started filling with tomatoes and collard greens. He volunteered twice a week at a re-entry center downtown. Men coming out of prison with nothing, no job, no family, no anchor. Calvin knew how to talk to them in a way social workers couldn't, because he'd been them. Priya Nair, the law student who found the buried statement, graduated and accepted a fellowship at the Innocence Project. She was 24 years old and had already identified 3 other cases with similar Brady violations in the same county. Detective Ray Colson, retired, 74, living in Florida, was under investigation by the Georgia Bureau of Investigation for a pattern of evidence suppression across multiple cases spanning his career. Angela Haynes received the Governor's Award for Foster Care Excellence. She cried when Marcus called to tell her. "I didn't do anything special," she said. "Yes, you did," Marcus told her. "You saw a boy who had stopped eating and staring at walls, and you sat across from him and asked him what he wanted to be when he grew up. That's everything, Angela." That's the whole thing. Marcus Elijah Webb spent 30 years becoming the thing that could save his father. He didn't do it with rage. He did it with a notebook, with Saturday mornings in a courthouse, with letters read so many times the paper went soft. His father wrote him one sentence in 2003 that he never forgot. Stay curious instead of angry. Anger closes doors. Curiosity opens them. Calvin Webb wrote that from a prison cell. He had no idea his 9-year-old boy would one day walk into a courtroom, set down his gavel, and open every door they had closed. Here is what I want you to sit with. Terence Gould's statement was real. It existed. It was sitting in a folder for 22 years. 22 years of a man's life taken, not by mistake, but by a system that decided it wasn't important enough to look. There are people sitting in cells right now with folders just like that. And somewhere, there is a child who loves them. What that child becomes, what they're allowed to become, depends entirely on who sees them. Angela Haynes saw Marcus. Judge Dorsey saw Marcus. Priya Nair saw a case worth saving. Seeing someone is an act of justice. If this story moved you, if you needed to hear today that love is patient enough to survive 22 years, do me a favor. Hit that like button. It takes 1 second and it helps more than you know. Share this video with someone who is fighting for someone they love. Someone who is tired. Someone who needs to know that the door is still there, even when it feels locked. And subscribe, because every week we come back here and we tell the truth about what ordinary people are capable of when someone decides they matter. Now I want to hear from you. Has someone ever fought for you when the whole system said no? Or have you ever been the one fighting? Tell me their name in the comments. They deserve to be named. The gavel doesn't always fall the right way the first time. But some people are patient enough and brave enough to pick it up again. Remember that.